My panel joining me now is Ben Oquist, Executive Director at the Australia Institute, and Nick Cater, Executive Director at the Menzies Research Institute. Gentlemen, thanks both for your time. Why don't we start with hard lockdown talk now in Victoria. It seems, you know, there's been these different schools throughout, Ben, on what to do, and suppression was seen to be the best way, but suppression not really working in Victoria. It's not necessarily that the method doesn't work, but the competence, the application of it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, we live in uncertain times, and it's not clear always months ahead what the best strategy is going to be. And these kind of I think this is really mistaken, these kind of calls for certainty. It's just not possible with a virus that's doing what it's doing. Now, there's been talk that, you know, New South Wales is not going to have any lockdowns, come what may. I don't think that's what the Premier is saying there. She's saying not at the moment. We want to avoid it.
She won't go preemptive. She won't err on going ahead of it, essentially.
But if there was a breakout, she might have to put in further lockdowns. So, to Victoria, if the situation gets worse or doesn't get into control, they might have to have further lockdowns. That's the nature of this virus. It's very difficult. But I do think it is bringing up a debate about elimination versus suppression. And I think a little while ago we looked across to New Zealand and the Prime Minister said, well, we're not like New Zealand. We're not going to have as big effect on our economy because we're going to go for suppression. I think we're looking a bit more enviously at New Zealand now. And here's the reality, is that some states are getting to elimination. So I think it's a worthwhile debate to have about whether to pursue elimination in some places. I'll give you one example. It makes total sense, I think, for Tasmania to pursue elimination. And you can imagine the kind of kudos that Tasmania would have and the attractive place it would be for international students and tourism in the future if it did get eliminated.
Except how can you go for elimination when you want international tourists? Who's going to go there and lock down for two weeks? This is the problem.
Yeah, that is. I think it...
tourism's huge there for Tasmania.
It is. I think there's slightly more possibility with overseas students and migration, people who might be willing to take on the 2 weeks. I accept it's much more difficult with tourism, but I think it's a worthwhile debate to be having, as some states are effectively getting elimination and the success that New Zealand is having. I take the Treasurer's words. He says the best economic response is an effective health response. And I'm not sure if it's suppression or elimination, but what I know is it's not simple. And we're going to have to give state premiers some flexibility to have further restrictions or lockdowns when they need them.
Well, they've got the flexibility, Nick Cater. The question is, are they going for the strategy anyway? If you look at what South Australia has done, for example, as soon as there were any cases in New South Wales, bang, the borders go up to them straight away. I mean, it just seems pretty clear that some states are going for eradication, even though we keep hearing that's not the official strategy. Does this need to be cleared up?
It certainly needs to be cleared up, but I think Ben has inadvertently nailed the problem with the eradication strategy. I mean, he says, wouldn't it be great if Tasmania managed to eliminate the COVID-19 degrees? And I agree, it would be great, and that would be great for tourism. But look, I mean, that's the point, isn't it? If you do this, you have to hermetically seal the state or whichever area you're doing. My takeout, in fact, our very strong takeout from the Melbourne outbreak is that this is final conclusive proof that it is really impossible. And I'd like to see Ben point to another country in the world, even in New Zealand now they have cases again. It's impossible to get elimination because there will always be people who don't comply, or somebody comes in, or there's a little pocket somewhere, and that only has to take hold and fester for a bit and it flares up. I think we've come as close as we could to elimination. We haven't. So now we're going to have to do with what virtually every other country in the world has to do, and that's learn to live with it. But learn to live with it from a fantastic position of strength. I mean, let's remember there are 3.5 deaths per million population right now in Melbourne. That's probably going up. It's probably going to go up more than the national average, like 4. But, you know, the United States, New York, 1,600 deaths per million. So, look, we have an issue, we have to deal with it, but we have the luxury, I think, or at least we have created the good luck for ourselves by a lot of hard work up to now, that we have room to move, we can open up the economy, and we can deal with cases as and when they arise, as we have recently in New South Wales.
Yeah, and I take your point on true elimination is just about impossible when you're allowing Australians to return from overseas, universities as well. But is there a lesson out of this as well on what suppression really means? I mean, if you look at Melbourne, we were told there'd be outbreaks, there were, They did localised lockdowns. They didn't appear to work. Ditch the hotel quarantine for a moment. Yes, that's been a clear issue. But even locking down on the suburbs after didn't appear to work. Do we need to know what living with and suppression actually is? Is it 100 cases a day? Is that fine? Should that no longer get headlines in 6 months? 100 in Victoria, everyone says, cool, no worries, let's move on with it. Is it 10? I mean, it feels like people aren't really sure what to panic at as well.
Yeah, you can't put a number on it, of course, but you know, it needs to be a low number. It needs to be one where we can basically, most important thing, of course, is to keep the vulnerable safe, and that's largely the elderly and people with certain illnesses. So we need to protect those. We need to do better in our nursing homes. But we can live with this thing. I think we have to live with this thing, because we did some modelling very early on in this. At what's the best strategy? Do you lock down hard? Do you not lock down as they did in Sweden? Or do you go stop-start? So every time there's an outbreak, do you lock down and then let it up again? And the worst case scenario was the stop-start, because there's no business certainty or anything like that. So whatever we do, we've got to get out of this pattern we're in at the moment, where you have an outbreak, you lock down, businesses don't know what's going on, and you lose people's support. We are losing social licence for this very quickly. People's patience is running out. We have to level with them what the pathway is out of this, and then we have to follow that course steadily and with some nerve.
Yeah, I tell you what, if people are insisting that their rights can't be impinged upon when they want to dine in at KFC, I reckon you're in trouble on the social licence, so I get that, apart from the hiding in cupboards as well in some houses. A bit of a change of pace, if you like. So. The situation with Bari Weiss resigning from the New York Times, it's created quite the storm, and the wrong thing she's accused the newspaper of, essentially, that you can't have other opinions within the New York Times, bullied by colleagues and also driven by Twitter. What did you make of this, Ben Oquist?
Well, I do think we've got a problem in our public debate, that it can get a bit shouty and people aren't listening to the other side. And, of course, social media is part of that. On the other hand, social media has been a great democratising of media and allowing a lot more voices to flourish. But it shouldn't be at the expense of diversity and allowing people to be shouted down. I guess
is there a particular problem with Twitter? It's so misrepresentative and so shrill about things that if you log on there and think that that's what's happening out there, not going to have any good outcomes for anyone. Organisations, political parties.
No, I mean, you've got to have a broad view. I mean, you can't just log on to The Australian and think that represents pluralism, or Sky, or the ABC, or Twitter, or Facebook. Everybody's got their kind of niche and biases. And I think there has been a fraying of the culture. I look, just to kind of look at the other side of the debate a little bit, I looked at the kind of shouting down of Yasmin for her comments about Anzac Day in Australia. And while that wasn't so much Twitter generated, I thought it was the same kind of storm, that she was basically harassed out of the country for what she was saying because it was seen to be controversial. And I think that is a real worry in our debate, if people can't say something, even if it's controversial, without being shouted down and handed out. But there are a lot of people who've had it pretty good in established media outlets, and I don't think we should get away from the fact that social media has been a democratising force as well, and that can be a good thing.
Yeah, I'm just a bit torn. I mean, the amount of misinformation on Facebook.
Something's got to be done about that.
Twitter.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
But that's kind of slightly different. Misinformation does need to be regulated, controlled.
Okay,
Facebook
Nick,
and social media
can I ask you about
the
the point made that you can of course reflect on Bari Weiss, but also should people criticising what's happened there in that situation, the lack of pluralism, also pause for thought on what was said about Yasmin Abdul-Magid as well?
Oh, I think so, absolutely. I mean, I deplore this sort of, whether it comes from whichever side of politics it comes from, I hate this shouting down and abuse and harassment that goes on. But, you know, I mean, I think Ben and I are going to be on a unity ticket on this one. I mean, Ben and I we disagree on some substantial issues, but, you know, Ben's the sort of guy who understands that you just need to have free and open debate. You know, if somebody puts up a bad idea, the best thing is to let it circulate so that others can put up ideas to counter it. I'm horrified by what's happened at the New York Times, this closing down of the debate. And, every paper, as Ben says, has its own particular bias. But there has to be some broader spectrum of debate, because otherwise we just become poor as a society and we just come divided up into silos. And none of us want that, I don't think.
A senator, essentially, a senator's views, whatever people think of them, and it was pointed out by Greg Sheridan. He said, the really violent aspects of whether you call it the protest movement or the splinter off of the protest movement of Black Lives Matter, that it might need military force. And then suddenly that view from a prominent senator was supposed to not have been published. That's what has led a lot of people to sort of raise their eyebrows.
Yeah, I mean, a senator is he's been elected, right? You might not have elected him, but somebody has, and he deserves to be heard. And I thought that was very, very poor judgment by the New York Times, and ultimately the paper loses its credibility with these kind of things. It's not good for the paper as well as not good for a free society.
Nick Cater, Ben Oquist, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Tom.